Hello, Guardians, and welcome to episode 112 of Podcast vs. Enemies, a Destiny podcast dedicated to the PvE Sandbox. My name is Impetus, and as always, I'm joined by my co-hosts, Court and St. Kabir. This has been one of the most difficult weeks in our beloved game's lifespan, and the three of us have decided to modify this episode's topic in light of the recent news. We will be discussing the layoffs at Bungie, but we have a different topic as well that we'll be focusing on in the latter half of this week's episode. We're going to carry on as we always do. We think that is the most appropriate path to take in light of the changes coming with the future of the game. But for now, let's talk about what we did in and out of Destiny 2 last week. Court, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Yeah, hello lads. Yeah, it certainly has been a difficult week, but we shall push on, think positive. And so during that week, Saint and I were doing our kind of last couple of challenges for the Master Salvation's Edge. Very interesting challenges. I'll let Saint talk about the challenges themselves if he wants to. But got some sweet loot, including some solid sniper and pulse rifle rolls. I've kind of posted that over on the Patrons Lounge as well, if you want to have a little peek. It was a few days ago as of this recording anyway. My damage stacking infographic is partially published. It's over on my Coffee, and it'll be out to the public in the near future. I just didn't want to publish that during that week. Just a lot of not really fair to kind of grab the attention away from the important matters of the Bungie layoffs. And outside of Destiny, I've been playing through GTA 5 as well. It's a very lovely game. I will point that out. Last time I properly played it was probably on. Yeah, it would have been PS3, which is many, many years ago. It's kind of surprising how long these games are if you think about when they initially launched. But Grand Theft Auto 5 was some time ago, and it's went through, 3 console generations now.
It's pretty impressive.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so busy week for many good but also negative reasons. The Salvation's Edge, I will just quickly say, a very challenging run. The first couple of challenges, not too bad. It's just your usual kind of, you do a couple of runs and then you get to feel how it's supposed to work, and you just do it. But Verity and Zenith, or the Witness fight, we were in there for a couple of hours, weren't we, Saint?
Yeah, we got through all the first 3 of them in a single sitting. It wasn't even really a big issue, other than there was like some frustrating bugs in the third encounter challenge where if you're like trying to deposit at the same time, it would take one of your residents away instead of all 3. And the challenge is you have to deposit with 3 full stack of 3. So it's pretty annoying, but yeah, we get through all 3 of the first encounter challenges, and then Verity and the Witness were just kind of a slog. Because it's actually a challenge to stay alive, which is saying a lot, and I don't think that is... they're actually challenging raid challenges, which really sounds ironic, but they aren't all that way. Even evidenced by this raid, going through the first 3 in a single sitting, like no problem. Coming back to these reminded me of much more intensive ones. I remember a long time ago, Master, Gatekeeper challenge in VOG was always a pain, right? Of getting the timing down on killing everything and having everybody stay alive in the portals and stuff like that. That Verity felt a lot more like that. And I don't even know how to describe the Witness challenge. There's just so many things in the Master version of that encounter. It definitely gets you back more of like a contest mode feeling, just because of the amount of things that can kill you. And yes, the enemies can kill you, but you can die to if you're not taking out the ads quick enough, you can get, rubber banded into a screed and die. You can get rubber banded into the bees landing on one of the resonance attacks or the resonant attack ending and die. A captain, you could get hit by a hand as it's coming out of the ground trying to pick up a different buff. You can die because you didn't refresh your stack in time. You could die because you picked up too many stacks. yeah, just so many things that can kill you in that challenge that you have to keep everybody alive for to get those. Everybody basically having Glyph Breaker up at the same time before you go into DPS phase. But it also made it really satisfying when we finally cleared those challenges. So shout out to everybody that was in on that. Honestly, those are the hard parts of the raid title. Now I just have a few static triumphs to go back and finish up for the Iconoclast title. And kind of like Court said, I just totally dumpstered my spoils, raid spoils reserves on some of the depth weapon rolls at the end of that, because don't plan to do a lot of Master Witness challenge clears. Honestly, at this point, I would not say. So thankful for that. And yeah, despite just how rough of a week this was, I did have a great time last night. Was the final session of the first campaign that I've run as a DM, and it was a great, it was like 4.5 hour finale, and it was just a ton of fun. So I'm very grateful for that and that whole crew. It's a lot of rant about Master Raids. Impetus, how you doing, man? What have you been up to this week?
Well, my D&D session is hopefully tonight, so I can't say that I've gotten to play D&D since our last episode, but looking forward to that for sure. I've been running seasonal activities nonstop again. I just want to get all those weapons unlocked, especially the Time-Worn Wayfarer, because we've got that buff to aggressive frame scout rifles right around the corner. I did unlock Corrasion and Faithkeeper. I'm obviously more excited about Corrasion than Faithkeeper for crafting purposes. But the sidearm eludes me, man. Those red borders are just not dropping for me. I have deep sight harmonizers, but I'm at that point where I want to save those for the raid weapons more than my episode / seasonal loot, if you feel me. So I'm just forcing myself to play more seasonal activities. It's funny getting those when you knock down those, I don't even know what they're called, but the totems that you need to spend a hammer charge on to get all the little radio light samples to appear. When you go and dunk those at the very end, I've been getting exotic armor drops like crazy, which kind of feels crazy to say that I have more exotic armor drops than red borders of the episode weapons, but that has basically been it, because every time I run one of those battlegrounds, I've been getting the radio light samples enough that I can go and get that extra one to deposit. So that's been nice, but for most of the armor that is dropping, I already have pretty spicy rolls, and it would take a very, very, very specific roll with a very, very specific stat distribution for me to swap that out for my current exotic armor. But yeah, keep giving me Lunafaction boots, game. I will keep sharding them, keep getting more glimmer out of it. But that's really been my week. So yeah, been working on that. Been having a good time. Again, I like the battlegrounds. I think the standout, and I'll say this when we do our review of the episode, but for me, the standout of Echoes has just been the changes to Nessus. I think the environment is probably the best it's ever been, especially once we get underground in that third battleground. Yeah, third battleground, and then the exotic mission not the exotic mission. The mission that we do at the end of Act 2, that is just a very beautiful space that we get to go to. So I am looking forward to the exotic mission. I haven't gotten to play it yet, but I'm really hoping the play space looks incredible there. But that's enough about me. Let's turn over to our podcast reviews and our community feedback. Saint?
Yeah. Going to start off by giving a shout out to some new patrons, supporters of the show, which we greatly appreciate. Ghosty, Lurch, and then John S. and David. Thank you all very much for joining the ranks of the patrons. We're grateful to have you aboard. And each and every episode, give a shout out to our PvE Grandmasters, Dark Wizard 85, David Deacon, I'm K Rose, Jelly Puppy, the Shazzle, the Puckster, the Mirror, and this moment. As a reminder, you can send us all kinds of feedback about the show directly to any of our socials or at Pod versus Enemies on the platform still known as Twitter, and of course on Patreon. If you are a patron of the show, we're happy to answer any questions and updates and anything like that, where you can reach out to us directly on the platform. Positive, critical, and constructive feedback always helps with the trajectory of the podcast and how we present all kinds of activities, builds, and more in the PvE sandbox. We want to, of course, extend thanks to everybody that supports PvE, downloading, listening, watching episodes each week, discussing the show with us in the Discord, and supporting via Patreon. Speaking of which, if you would like to support the show, you can click on the link to Patreon found in the show notes of this episode, where you get access to members-only channel in a Discord server, behind-the-scene content, text write-up, weapon breakdown reviews, input on the future show, and much more. Court, what are we talking about this week?
Yeah, so we originally had lined up for this week. We were going to talk about the Hunter, Titan, and Warlock prismatic builds. We had the exotic class item recommendations, and we also had some recommended Ergo Sum rules. We've decided to move that to a future episode. There's a lot of content. There's a lot of just a lot of bulk to those topics. We wanted to get condense down to kind of a more decompressed episode this week. Talk about the recent Bungie layoffs. We have a kind of additional topic that we'll talk about after that with the state of PvE Sandbox. So there's going to be some fairly critical, fairly kind of commentary like kind of discussion about the layoffs, but then we did want to make this a little bit more of a kind of a PvE episode on top of that. We'll be a little bit less critical, be more kind of our standard selves when we talk about the state of the PvE Sandbox. So the aforementioned topics, we'll get to them in the future, but this week we're going to talk about the Bungie layoffs and the PvE Sandbox. In terms of housekeeping, kind of updates to the Patreon podcast, we do have a few posts that we've put up recently. We've got the commemoration Deepstone Crypt machine gun breakdown that went up. Blast Furnace from the Brave Arsenal has also went up. We'll be going through some of the DSC and the Brave weapons over the next few weeks, so keep an eye on that. And I also put up the Critical Anomaly breakdown. So all those breakdown text posts are up on the Patreon for patrons to view. So yeah, like we said, this is going to be our little section regarding the Bungie layoffs. We're going to touch on the sort of highlights of the layoffs themselves, just to kind of keep us and you, the listeners, kind of in the know of what's been going on the last couple of days. We'll also talk about kind of further highlights. What does this mean with Bungie and Destiny in regards to some kind of not official commentary from Bungie, but kind of various other sources that have kind of talked about what does this mean for far future when it comes to Destiny and Bungie. If you'd like to skip this, fair enough. We will obviously have some timestamps in this in the show notes, but at least for the next 30 or ish minutes, we're just going to talk about the Bungie layoff. So I'll kick us off here, just in very kind of high level highlights. Highlights is probably not the best way to describe them. They're certainly not highlights in terms of a positive manner, but just to touch upon on the kind of the top level. So Bungie did announce that they have shrunk from 1,300 employees to roughly 850. Now, this is on top of the layoffs that we talked about last year, back in November of 2023. So that means 220 people have been laid off as of 31st of July 2024. That includes several top executives and senior leader roles. Teams hit hardest include the audio department, narrative, and player support. Additionally, they have moved 155 staff to Sony Interactive Entertainment, kind of a centralized role within Sony themselves. And they also said that a separate group will spin out a new game company within Sony working on an incubation project codenamed Gummy Bears, which is kind of a MOBA Smash Brother style game, kind of fighting game from that kind of top level perspective. In essence, Bungie's rapid expansion from the last 5 years stretched their talent too thin and too quickly, in addition to broad economic slowdown, sharp downturn, in the games industry, the quality miss with Lightfall, and the need to give both the final shape and marathon, quote, the quality our players expect and deserve. And another quote here, we were overly ambitious, our financial safety margins were subsequently exceeded, and we began running in the red. So lads, very big topic, obviously, the last couple of days. What are our kind of big vibes when it comes to this?
Sadness, I would say, frustration, generally is the vibe here. It's just really tough to watch. It's tough to watch people that are talented and passionate and good at what they do lose their job. And despite knowing what they've done, what they're capable of, how invested they are, to see that still result in people losing their jobs, their livelihoods, and dreams of working for a company like this and franchise like this is really hard to see. And especially when it comes after something like the Final Shape. You release something like the Final Shape that is just by all means a hit, right? It is critically reviewed well. It is popular amongst your player base. It is firing on all cylinders, and yet right after that, you get hit with something like this, and it's just that feeling of what's the point? What if even these testers, these engineers, these writers, these directors can get laid off after putting out this quality of work? Who is safe? And that is it's just like a really dark thought to have, but a common one kind of over the past couple of years looking into like game dev in general. And there's some lights in that tunnel, but yeah, it's really just tough to watch, man. Impetus.
Yeah, it's just been really hard scrolling through Twitter and seeing post after post from the dozens, at least on Twitter, but as we soon came to find out, hundreds of people that were finding out they had been laid off, especially the folks that were finding out from the official article that was posted by Bungie. This was actually the first time that we'd heard first from Bungie that they were planning to lay off people, and it seems like employees were finding out about that from the article first and then logging in or trying to log in and finding out that their Bungie ID no longer worked and the implications from that. So that was very demoralizing. Again, we found out about this last Wednesday, and seeing the posts, the pictures, kind of reading about the cracks coming to light, about how things had not quite been what we assumed they were in the lead up to the Final Shape, the development of the Final Shape during the kind of extended period of the last season. Very, very difficult to watch. Then, of course, all the information about Pete Parsons' spending habits coming to light and the innumerable articles and reacts to all of that. It has not been fun. I did have to eventually just put the phone down, not go on Twitter, not go on Reddit, because I had hit my emotional limit. We've been very blessed to get to know some developers personally, so I think this was especially hard because we know the faces and the names behind this studio, this massive studio, and obviously the fear of waiting to hear if any of them had been affected was not a great feeling, but I think that is important for everyone to remember, is that these are people. These are real people that work on this game that you love and or hate, depending on how you feel about Destiny 2. And this was their job. And for for most of them, almost all of them, I would say, they were very passionate about the work that they did, the work they contributed to this franchise, this incredibly long franchise, this unique franchise. And it has been very tough to watch both people who were recent employees, but also longtime employees find out that they're not going to be able to see this all the way through, or they're not going to keep contributing to a dream project or a company that they had a lot of love and passion for, or just a group of colleagues that they had a lot of love and passion for, especially on the narrative side. I know that was really hard for many of those people, losing the ability to work with the storytellers and also the voice actors for whom they wrote a lot of those lines. It's very, very tough to read and get to understand all the stuff that they contributed to bring up one example of one of the departments that was hit hardest. So yeah, it is tough. It is hard to have hope right now. But we have gotten some idea, an unofficial idea from journalists who have been talking to people that have been speaking on the condition of anonymity, of course, because no one's allowed to talk on an official line from Bungie. But we have some idea. The announced plans, obviously the 3 episodes coming out with the eventual release of Destiny 2 Frontiers, as we saw from that trailer, the dungeon pack, and then what we believe is still the case of an eventual release of Marathon in 2025. That is all still in place. We have not gotten any, again, the ex-employees who are aware of this stuff do not know of any changes to those plans. So that is our understanding of what the situation is for the future of both Destiny and Bungie as a whole. Beyond that, though, there is some speculation. Again, nothing officially confirmed, but there are just people talking to sources such as Jason Schreier have pointed out some of the following things. I will talk on the future of Destiny 2 and then pass it over to Court for the Destiny IP as a whole. But for the future of Destiny 2, what has been told to journalists is that we will not have any more traditional annual expansions, but rather content packs. These content packs will be about the size of the Shadowkeep expansion, followed about 6 months later by an Into the Light sized pack. There will be very familiar Destiny elements like destinations, raids, campaigns, but condensed down to a smaller scale. And the goal here is to achieve and develop a more replayable, unique style of activity like the Coil from last season of The Wish, and less focus in turn on one-off campaigns and more the replayable activity. We will not see widespread updates that hit every facet of the game at once, like most expansions have come with, right? Those massive patch notes that takes a while to scroll through, and they will be far less frequent than what players are used to. Court, what is the news on Destiny 3 and the Destiny IP as a whole?
Well, it was a little bit of a surprise to, I think, a majority of people, at least from the pulse reading I got looking on various socials, that Destiny 3 was and is not in production, and Bungie themselves, well, at least the higher-ups, they consider it to be too big of a risk. So the idea that they had, which is now no longer happening, they wanted to go down the path of splitting up Destiny as an IP into more manageable components. So Destiny 2 would still remain, and that would be primarily focused with PvE. Again, these are all just very top-level points, so we would be missing some nuance on top of this being, it's all speculation. Quote, Payback, which is their kind of, again, part of the Destiny franchise, would be our third-person adventure game set in universe and using Destiny characters similar to Warframe and Genshin Impact. They were working on a mobile Destiny game, and they were thinking about spinning off a separate 3v3 Crucible game. So that would be like channeling Trials. So various points that are no longer happening. That is, again, presuming this speculation is truthful, none of these things are happening. So Destiny 2 is going to remain, obviously. But we did hear from Luke Smith and Mark Noseworthy. They were... there's been kind of a back and forth. We're not sure if they stood down. I think it's more... we've heard more news that they decided to step down before being laid off. They were the leads on Payback and / or other cancelled Destiny projects, so they're no longer part of Bungie. They're no longer part of anything related to Bungie. They have again. I think it's on the side of that they stood down. Originally, I think that was reported that they were included with the layoffs, but we did get some further news to say that they decided to step down. So yeah, speaking just regarding Destiny 3, I don't think I've ever been convinced that Destiny 3 was in production. I know a lot of folks, they've thought that Destiny 3 would be kind of chipped away in the background. I've never really been convinced with that. Just with how massive and dense Destiny 2 is, it just never really made much sense. With, we even with Lightfall kind of faulting, it was still a large expansion, regardless of the critical reception. It was still large enough to have various changes to the game. Like, that's where we got a lot of our kind of quality of life updates. A lot of bugs were kind of squashed. Just a lot of things did happen with Lightfall and with the final shape. And prior to that, with Witch Queen, we have had these massive expansions. When I played those, and when I still play the final shape just now, just never really thought like Destiny 3 could be secretly being worked in the background. Just never felt like that was such a thing. I'm not trying to I'm not being critical to those that thought Destiny 3 was in production. Like, that's fair enough. Like, to have that that kind of desire, that wish to clean the slate for Destiny. I think at this point I would love to see a sequel to Destiny, but that's just not. We're not going to see that, at least in the next 5 to 10 years. Saint, what was your vibes with a potential Destiny 3?
Yeah, I'm looking at this thinking, why, game development is unfortunately like a monetary endeavor, and you got to have some kind of like cost benefit analysis here. So my mind goes to, what is the cost of making a D3 and what is the benefit of it? What am I like actually getting out of making a brand new game versus trying to continue to develop on the platform I have now? Generally, this amounts to people want to start a new game because they want to develop a new engine. They want to move on to a new platform, a new way of developing things, all kinds of stuff like that. These are usually big motivators. They want to build features that the current engine or system just wouldn't let them allow, or don't make sense to try to develop and integrate in the current game. So to Court's point, I don't think that a lot of those things are true about Destiny. Destiny 2 operates on an engine that is developed by Bungie and keeps just being iterated on by Bungie. It's old at this point, but like many engines, it just keeps getting updated and iterated upon every whatever release. You use 6 months, a year, who knows. So the idea of Bungie just swapping over to the latest Unreal release, it just never really seemed like it was a thing that was going to happen, or anything that they had ever talked about. There was nothing to give us any kind of hint that they would be like majorly changing game engines and have a big motivator to go remake everything in a new engine for Destiny 3 and have all these new ways of working, when they can just kind of just integrate that continuously with what's going on in Destiny 2. And the same thing goes for like player investment, and kind of other half of that coin is like onboarding experience, which is something we can talk about a little bit later. But yeah, so I think a lot of people were like really sad or frustrated that there was no D3, but my expectation, well, obviously now I know this is naive and untrue, but my anticipation was that after the final shape, there would be kind of a lull for them to have a moment to think about what are major changes that we want to bring to Destiny as a franchise. Maybe we went an entire year while Marathon gets the spotlight and there is no major Destiny expansion, just some seasons, and then maybe another Into the Light update, which, okay, that part is kind of true. But yeah, I was expecting no major expansion, maybe for like a 2-year gap, and then coming back into, okay, let's deliver some absolutely massive changes to like systems in the game, and then keep going with Destiny from there. I was really surprised to hear that they were like trying to diverge into action games and some other stuff like that, like within Destiny, because that's not, I mean, yeah, I have no idea that they could like do that well. There's hundreds of really talented people that work there. Sure, you could make a action 3D game look good and feel good and probably be very fun to play. But people love Destiny and just keep playing this game because it succeeds in a lot of different areas that some other games just can't compete with it, like movement and shooting and gunplay feel, and some of the build crafting systems that people get hooked in on. That's what keeps them coming back. So yeah, it does seem really odd to me that they would not try to be capitalizing more on that on their major projects, or considering some kind of delay and larger overhaul to Destiny 2. I'm going to pass it up to Impetus for his thoughts here in just a second. But the last thing I'll say is, Luke Smith and Mark Noseworthy are just people that are really have been at the core of people's like perception of people that are working on these games for a really long time. It's just two guys out of hundreds of people that contribute to these games. But we've just heard a lot over the years about the impact they have had on the game. I know that, I saw a tweet from Tocom that was just talking about Kevin Yanis talking about the way that they would advocate for the player and their intense investment in the franchise and all these things. I'm pretty sure it was Luke Smith who, from his like WoW background, was a big proponent of the idea of raids in Destiny 2 and how much that has shaped this game over time. So it is really just sad and like kind of end of an era, I feel like, moment to see them both depart the studio. Seemingly, or allegedly, I should say, the project that they were working on was canceled like a couple months ago. And I see they're resigning or leaving as their project was canceled a couple months ago. They saw the writing on the walls. They've probably just been spending the last 2 months kind of trying to manage, and leave things as good as they can before just departing from the studio. But it is odd and surprising and end of an era kind of a feeling to see those two leave the studio after how invested they had been in the franchise over the past decade. Impetus, I don't know where you at. Future expansions, Destiny 3, spinoffs, feelings, thoughts, opinions.
Destiny has been the moneymaker for the studio for pretty much its entire length. I mean, it's their moneymaker. And yes, Marathon is in the future, but I think every detail that has come out about the project, the very brief Vidoc that introduced Chris Barrett as the game director, only then to find out that Chris Barrett is no longer the game director, that project feels so shaky to me. Even the concept of it has apparently been changing. I don't think there's a big appeal for an extraction shooter nowadays. I think we have, no offense, because I know that we do have some Call of Duty fans here, but I feel like once Call of Duty gets to the genre, it is probably starting to phase out, and you don't want to be following up Call of Duty on an extraction shooter at this point. I think we know how new extraction shooters, I should say, are going to handle, and I don't think that Bungie can make a better one than the Call of Duty universe. So I don't know. I had kind of thought maybe it wouldn't be Destiny 3, but there would be some sort of revamp. Maybe it would go back to, I think there was a common idea floating around the community where it would just be called Destiny, right? We'd get rid of the number and just say it's the Destiny universe, but they would be trying to bring in stuff and storylines and places from Destiny 1 into this up-to-date, more modern Destiny 2 era, and then rebranding it all as just the Destiny Universe IP or the Destiny IP. So I don't know. I don't want Marathon to fail so that Destiny can succeed, but at the same time, I am not confident in the success of Marathon. It would have to really blow not only myself away, but also I think a lot of people away, and that could still happen, for Bungie to have another money-making IP. But for that time being, it is Destiny, and Sony knows this, and Sony owns you. So either Bungie comes to an end, and we're going to kind of be talking about the actual studio itself here in a bit, but either Sony gets broken up and the wonderful people that work there right now are funneled into other projects within the Sony umbrella, or Bungie sticks together and they got to really keep coming up with something that can keep making the studio and Sony by extension money. And that's right now and possibly for the future, just Destiny. I don't know what they're going to do. Obviously, I don't know how much money Destiny is making right now compared to how much it used to be making. We've certainly looked at the population numbers for when the expansions dropped. They were quite high for Lightfall. They were quite high for the Final Shape. But that clearly wasn't enough given the layoffs. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't think it's crazy to say I thought we'd have something coming in the future, whatever you want to call it, the third iteration or just the, an upgraded, updated version, not necessarily a new engine, but big changes that would kind of bring Destiny forward a bit. I don't think you're crazy for believing in that. I am still planning on expecting it to some degree. not as much as I used to following this news, but yeah, I don't know. Nobody knows. It feels like nobody really knows. What is the future of Bungie internally that we've learned about Court?
So we learned a little bit about the final shape and its delay and what it actually allowed them to add to Destiny. So they managed to add the Dread combatants. We got Dual Destiny. We got an extra encounter with Salvation's Edge with Verity encounter, which does kind of make sense with how contrast it is with the rest of the rest of that raid. We got exotic class items. We got Ergo Sum, the sword, the special ammo swords, and we also got GM Excision. They spoke about the new player onboarding experience remains fairly subpar, like below expectations, because the team responsible for that onboarding experience a few years ago were given one shot at it, and then since then no one's been allowed to tweak with it. We've seen small tweaks here and there. You go to Ikora, new players can just jump straight into getting their super. You don't need to go through like a kind of hoops to get to straight into the game. We saw that with Into the Light. That was the change there. And they did say in some of these articles that the onboarding experience may change in the future to put more emphasis on onboarding. One of the other articles, one of the kind of quotes or comments was that Destiny's got quite an aging player base, which was something I found quite interesting. I never really thought about the player base as in terms of not the numbers, not the quantity of players, it's the age of the players, which I found fairly fascinating. It's one of the articles they talked about. I can't find the specific quote here, but yeah, like basically we're all old farts and we're still playing this game, and it's true because this franchise has existed for be coming up for 10 years in a couple of months, September time. Yeah, so next month actually, 10-year anniversary since Destiny 1 came out. And when I read that quote, I was a bit taken aback because it's like, yes, I have played this game pretty much for 10 years. And I don't think I've done that with any other franchise. Maybe Call of Duty, that's maybe something that's not so much, point A to B. I have played Call of Duty on and off from time to time. But Destiny as a franchise is something I've been stuck with, and I am now in my 30s, and I've been playing since my early 20s, and it's just like, oof. So that point about the aging player base and how they want to put more focus on trying to get the youngins, the younger player base, that's fair enough. But that player onboarding experience, I went through it once. I think it was for like a test account for like when I was doing split screen testing with and it was just horrible. It was just such a bad experience, and I'm not surprised that people would love to get into Destiny, but they can't stay on Destiny because it's just such a confusing, it's just a mess of an experience to get in. And like we talk about the Destiny experience being one of the best out there. When we play raids, we play dungeons, we do GMs, we talk about builds, we talk about weapon breakdowns, and once you're in it, it's a fantastic thing to be in. But just to kickstart it, it's horrible.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with you in the idea of like I'm not really thinking about player demographic split, but yeah, well, I maybe I get what they're concerned about because they're teenager players that used to just crank those engagement numbers, just had their second kid, and they ain't putting in the hours in the raids and dungeons anymore. The metrics are backsliding. But I mean, on a serious note, the new player onboarding experience it is getting marginally better over the years. I think going through some of the new stuff now in the game, where it can pull you in and take you through like the very early Guardian rank stuff, is maybe one of the better onboarding experiences we've had so far, but still leaves a lot to be desired, and especially in the ways that the game just has a steep barrier to understanding and to like buy-in potentially, depending on when you're trying to come into the game, with all the legacy content that the game has. And the reality is that you could download Destiny for free, and then if you like it, you should buy the final shape, and you'd pretty much be good from there on out. But still, even trying to convince somebody of that once they get in, to go buy a major expansion, then you're like kind of hooked in, and then you realize there's actually like a lot of old expansions that you really still need to pay for, and that's kind of a lot of money. And I think that also has contributed to the idea of like people, for better or accurately or unaccurately, whatever, probably more the former, perceiving that there's a massive barrier, right, to getting into Destiny, really into understanding it all. It is absolutely wild to hear the amount of things that they were able to add in the delay. And I mean, yeah, when you think about that amount of time and the amount that they were able to accomplish and how much the things that they added, more dread combatants, the exotic class items, ergo sum, the updates to the raid, all this stuff is kind of crazy. It's a massive amount of content, and it's hugely influenced, I feel like, people's perception of this expansion.
And Into the Light, right? Like that was just coming with the Final Shape expansion. Then we also had the stuff that came before the Final Shape expansion that was also added in.
Yeah, who built Onslaught? I know, seeing that stream, we saw like Tom Farnsworth, right, and Noah Lee, right, and all these guys, and I'm sure there's many other people who contributed to that. Chris and and the weapons team, Gear Team Armor cranking out these like armor sets and this huge set of reprised weapons and designing all these levels for this activity. It's a great point of impetus. Like how did you
and the two
possibly get
exotic
that done?
missions got redone. I'm assuming they had to do the lighting tweaks for Whisper and what's the Outbreak Perfected one called? I can never remember
0
that.
hour.
Thank you.
Yeah. Really incredibly impressive on a time crunch. Ridiculous amount of work to get done in seemingly like a month or so, 2 months.
Yeah, and that was on top of making all of these new. I think we're expecting dread combatants at some point. I'd certainly not I don't pretend to think that the dread combatants were spun up within this, what was it, 6 months delay. I think dread as a combatant race was a thing that they were testing for some time in the future, but they were like, okay, now we can, or we should really like push this out for the Final Shape. And to be honest, I don't see any like it feels flawless to be fighting against the dread. It doesn't feel like it's been tagged on. It doesn't, like they are with like the Hive, they are with the Scorn and the Taken, but you are up against some like healthy amount of the dread combatants. It doesn't feel like, oh, this was added like pretty late in stage. So yeah, I think again I can't find the article that goes into detail, or maybe it was something on Twitter where these devs were making all this content for Into the Light, for the Final Shape, for future content as well, working hard to the bone, and then most of them got the chop, and that's what ultimately I'm in such a solid mood about. Like I to Impetus's point earlier on, there was certainly a point for me that I just had to stop like scrolling, doom scrolling as they call it, on social media, because it was getting to me. And like just the thought that even with all this new content that was spun up in close proximity to the release, on top of Into the Light, on top of a brand new encounter for Salvation's Edge, all these exotic class item roles, dual Destiny. I mean, that's such a massive activity itself. To then, those staff members just getting the chop, and I don't know. It's just something about that just feels just catastrophically wrong. And I think they said the Final Shape was supposed to be the make or break, and we thought we talked about how the Final Shape was definitely it. We've made it, and so did the staff members, but obviously not. It was not make or break. It was certainly it doesn't matter how hard you've worked on this type of content, you're just going to get the chop anyway. Just really frustrating. There was a tweet I put out. It was actually in reply to Fallout, and there was obviously you get these folks saying, "Oh, quote, Bungie deserves this to happen," and that's just such evil, like, nonsense to be coming out of people's keyboards. It's just these people are just they really don't understand the devs, and I suppose we're in a very fortunate position. We're in a very lucky position to have some of these devs on our podcasts, and we've spoke to some of them, and they always exude passion, whether it's on or off the mic. We talk to various devs off the podcasts from time to time, and we have nothing but respect for them just because they exude that passion, and that's what makes it more devastating when they've worked to the bone to be then thrown out like trash. Just a tremendous amount of talent being squandered by simply mismanagement. That's all it is. It's just really sad.
Yeah. If you are hiring, it's probably the best thing you could possibly do is if you happen to work in games, in media, in software, whatever it is, and you're looking to hire some people, reach out to some people. The thought of, I could probably help versus helping is like a very small, very thin line, but it's the best thing you can do at this point. And other than that, if you can't, just be willing to listen to people and hear them out on their experience working there, and how difficult it is to let go and have to be forced to move on from something like that. Is tough, and it's like also really hard to just watch something that you believe in suffer over time, and this is like not even that personal for me, but even seeing people, there's like all these people that I remember going through Rooted Nightmares like raid tests with, test engineers, designers, whatever, and I saw a bunch of them get laid off, and these people, like Corey said, that we've had the chance to get to meet one way or the other, and you see their work, and you know exactly the influence that they are having on the game. That does have a very specific way of like making you feel a little like pessimistic, about the future. And I'm going to follow that up with saying this idea that is Destiny dead? Is this it? Is this the beginning of the heat death of the franchise? I don't know. I mean, it is really sad, right? It's an incredibly dark day to see the state that this studio is currently in, despite what the final shape was, and to see what has happened to all these people. I don't know if Destiny's dead. It is a certain specific kind of unique and addicting, and it has a ridiculously loyal, pretty large player base, including but not limited to the three of us here, and a lot of friends of ours. And I think that this could also be a moment of, we know these are the plans that we've heard from people that are working at the studio. We're working at the studio, that we've gotten from people like Paul Tassi and Jason Schreier, and gotten these insights from. Plans could change. They could shift around resources and focus more on what does a major Destiny expansion look like 2 years from now, like we were talking about. They could have strategy shifts, and we don't know ultimately what the future holds. It is clear that at least to some extent Destiny 2 will keep being supported, and content is going to keep being delivered into Destiny 2. Not exactly clear what that looks like or what the size of the expansions will be, but it's going to be maintained. Marathon is still a thing that is going to happen. Who knows how that turns out? I know that I'm definitely in the target market. Court and I played a bunch of, DMZ Warzone back in the day, and that was cool. And it was supported for like 6 months. And then they kind of abandoned that, right? And maybe a year it got support for. And that was kind of fun, but I would love to see Bungie make an attempt at something like that. But Yeah, I also think that Marathon is really definitely also going to need some kind of like 3v3, 4v4 arena play in combination with just like extraction shooter to make sure that it can stay viable. Long-term Apex Legends players will remember the time when that was a feature in that game, and I never understood why they didn't invest in that more, especially considering the amount of resources that it takes to keep a game like that running. Diversifying your game types and game modes available just seems like a really solid bet, which maybe making safer bets, distributing risk, and things like that is probably very high on the list of a lot of people that are leading up development at Bungie after this time. We've also heard several people express their confidence in Tyson Green as game director. Despite all the people that you have seen leave, people have expressed their confidence in him as a leader and as a designer. So what happens with Bungie and their leadership, their franchises, their involvement with Sony, what content we see to Destiny, who knows? But I don't think this is quite the end as it may seem, despite how sad it is. And I'm going to keep playing and keep supporting the people that are working on it. And it's still hundreds of them, right? Which is a tough thing to kind of work through mentally, but I don't think like boycotting the people that are still there doing what they love is the best response to something like this.
Well said. Well said, Saint. All right, let's turn our attention to the actual game that we cover on the show. Let's get in-game, so to speak, and talk about the state of the sandbox. This was a suggestion that was actually made to us by Johnny Hammersticks over in our Discord, so thank you very much for this recommendation. But yeah, we're going to do a state of the sandbox here where we talk about what's meta, what's kind of at the top here. This is also going to be, because we haven't ever done one of these before, we're also going to cover our kind of general or standby meta options in addition to the weapons, the armor, and the abilities that are being buffed by our artifact for the episode Echoes. So we'll be talking about some classics, but then also stuff that's kind of having a moment right now with not knowing whether or not some of that stuff that's hot right now will continue to be hot, but we are going to give you some coverage of things that are true blue, kind of solid, consistent expansion over expansion, hopefully episode over episode here. So again, we've broken this up into weapons. We'll be talking about this from an exotic and legendary point of view. Then we're going to cover armor, again, across our three classes here, Hunter, Titan, Warlock, in that order. And then the abilities side of things, Hunter, Titan, and Warlock. And at the very end, we're going to kind of talk about buffs, nerfs, and updates, more so what we would like to see, kind of things that are right there on the edge that maybe need just one small push before they come into the new hotness, stuff that maybe is really hot. Actually, it has been the new hotness, and maybe needs to cool off a little bit, and stuff kind of that we're keeping an eye on here, because again, with each of these with each of these acts, we are getting a new row in our artifact, so there is potential still, even throughout the Echoes episode, for things to come into the meta, so to speak, and things to get tuned in the patch that comes along with that new act. So without further ado, let's get into the weapons here. I'm going to pass you over to Court to talk about some of the exotics that we're looking at, that we've been looking at, what's new and hot, what's still kind of providing a pretty solid path, a quality path, even with the final shape coming around.
Yeah, so right off the bat, it is one of our new exotics, exotic snipers, I should say. It's Still Hunt. That has been, well, it's already been balanced. I would certainly say it was overperforming by quite a large amount. We also have seen a little, with the artifact mods coming in Act 2, we did see a little bit of a uptick with Cloudstrike. Whisper the Worm is obviously solar, so that has a little bit more synergy with the sniper artifact mods. Someone's put Darcy in our script for this week. I want to love Darcy, lads. I really do, but it's a no from me, unfortunately.
Darcy, it's just one like envious assassin catalyst away from being really strong, and it's just right on the edge there.
I agree. Yeah, it is very close to being like up there in terms of maybe not so much for like burst damage, but certainly something that if you've got a lot of ammo in the magazine or just total damage, it could perform quite well. It's got utility purposes as well with the sort of on-demand jolt. Over on our kind of other exotics, we've got Macrocosm, which also came out with the final shape. That is our kind of witness killer. If you want to not really think, if you don't want to aim down sight, you've got a perfect kind of vision of the wave attack that the witness does. Macrocosm will be your best friend for that, and also just for general tormentor and subjugator slaying. For kinetic primaries, kind of best for building with Transcendence. On Prismatic, you've got Kvostov. You've also got Outbreak Perfected, definitely a big one. Outbreak Perfected's also craftable if you go through 0 hour, get some of those, some of the perks. Rewind rounds is on Outbreak Perfected. It just such a great amount of damage. Great for building Transcendence. And we've also got Necrochasm and Thorn. They've got their kind of AoE effects that work quite well with Transcendence on Prismatic. Ergo Sum, another exotic that came out this expansion. We'll go into a little bit more detail with Ergo Sum in a future episode, so I won't go into too much here. Outside of those, we've got kind of the standby metas, we're calling it, just the kind of, they always work. You're kind of, we call them the kind of workhorse weapons. Kinetic side, we've got Wish Ender, Malfeasance Outbreak. Energy, we've got Buried Bloodline, we've got Grabton Lance, Sunshot in there as well. Heavy, we've got Tracked Cannon. Tracked Cannon's just got such a great utility, and it's been really fun watching Tracked Cannon to have this kind of smooth uptick over the last couple of years. It's really fun to see. Dragon's Breath from last season, Galahorn, of course, Legend of Acreus for a lot of those kind of shorter damage phases, like in Ghost of the Deep with the first boss encounter, and Levy's Breath, always solid. Again, another great witness DPS weapon. You don't need to aim down sight with it. You've got some great kind of peripheral aim for watching the waves come in from the witness with whether that's raid or excision. Saint, we've got some legendaries we want to kind of highlight here as well.
Yeah, so those are, new standby and kind of bubbling up exotics. I like what you said about Tractor Cannon. Divinity was like seeing a bit of a decline as people started to value that buff from Tractor Cannon more and realize the difference that could, that extra 15% can make. And then especially you add on like expanding Abyss and some other things this season, a lot of void focused stuff. I feel like it's just given it that bigger, even a bigger push up. And Divinity still really popular in overload heavy, activities, but it's not what it was, right? It is definitely not the dominating force. Tractor Cannon, I would say, is probably getting more playtime than Divinity. Would you guys agree with that aggregate, you think?
I'm trying to think of encounters where you can't tractor for an optimal DPS. I think War Priest, you still just due to the mechanics, you don't want to be up there on the platform, right? It makes more sense to be down there. So not that his head is super hard to shoot, but like Divinity just makes that job easier, and it can be a pretty challenging encounter. So I think Divinity is still the top play there. Nezarec, again, you can tractor. It's not like it's a distance thing there, but
it's very chaotic.
Malfeasance, Divinity still makes it pretty easy to hit consistent shots. I'm trying to go through the bosses here. Like, we used to Divinity roll, and then now you can use tractor. I think we've just gotten so much more aggressive, it feels like, with a lot of things, where you'll have somebody run up tractor, and if you're still playing at distance, you just use rockets, but you get the tractor in, and that way you don't need to have a player wasting that damage phase on their Divinity, and their DPS really tanks. You have the tractor, then you swap to another high powered special weapon, get your shots in with your, if it's a shotgun or something like that, swap back to Divinity once your timer's up to reapply, and then go back to your special and keep blasting away. So yeah, I don't know. Corey, can you think of another boss?
So the final boss for Ghost of the Deep was the one that kind of clicked in my head. Now, we don't tend to recommend Divinity in 3-player activities because that's one person now not doing damage, but that's pretty much always going to be like at least a 3-phase, comfortable 3-phase. You can definitely 2-phase, especially with something like Divinity, just with the final boss, the wizard being really like thin. It's a thin hitbox, and ideally, you're using Leviathan's Breath there, or linear fusion rifles with just how kind of a long damage period you have. Divinity there. I'm trying to think where else. No,
you can tractor everyone in Vogue.
Yep.
You can
tractor the witness. If you catch one of their hands, you can tractor. You can tractor pretty much everything. It's not that you you mentioned saying about Impetus, the War Priest. It's not that you can't tractor, it's just not viable. It's better just to use a Divinity there instead of a tractor cannon. But and by no means, like, Divinity's not terrible. It's still a solid weapon if you want to use Divinity in some examples. I know we played one, I think it was just a normal Salvation's Edge, and someone mentioned let's use Divinity as the debuff. But at least in this season, I was kind of arguing, we've got Expanding Abyss. It makes more sense to have a weaken or a track cannon for that example. Divinity maybe in the future, when we don't have those type of artifact perks, that may be viable. But even at that, I'm not convinced using Divinity on the Witness in most circumstances, because it's fairly easy to land those damage. It's more the mechanics that people kind of fumble about with rather than landing shots.
What do you use for a weekend for the boss in Garden, the final one?
That's one.
Do we use Divinity?
Deterministic Chaos is what you use, obviously, on that.
Okay.
Saying it's been years since I did the raid. You can't lie to me like that. I'll believe you and then make a fool of myself somewhere else.
I think where the bubble is positioned on the Garden of Salvation boss it makes it a lot easier to land. Again, linear fusion rifles or Leviathan's Breath. I can't visualize it at the moment, but it makes it very easy compared to if you didn't have it. And I think the boss is far away enough. No, you can still get up to the boss. There's no like invisible wall.
No, I mean you just have radial area pool.
Yeah, but again, that's maybe not viable anyway. You can definitely do tracked cannon, but yeah, I think Divinity would be a good shout there.
Yeah. It's a pretty, again, it's not like you couldn't use tractor beforehand. I think it's just with the buffs to tractor and similarly the nerfs to linears and kind of the real prominence of 1-2 punch shotguns, also just rockets continuing to be untouched.
GLs, explosives.
Yeah, GLs. You might as well just send some lucky titan in there with their tractor cannon, bop them, and then they sit there with their sword or their shotgun and blast away while everyone else stands at a more reasonable distance with GLs and rockets.
Bop them.
You just got to jump in there and bop them, dude. And then
I mean, when you hear that tractor cannon noise effect, you just think bop, right? That is a bop right there. Just
I would say the only other phrase I would probably accept is boop. Boop and bop.
Yeah,
okay. Hit them up.
It's a matter of how many O's you're feeling. I get you.
All right, so you're using a tractor cannon. What are you pairing with it? You're using a still hunt or a cloud strike. What are you pairing with it? And what are some great legendary options? We'll kind of get over to that side of the sandbox. Starting off with a few examples I just mentioned there. Let's say you are a tractor cannon player. What are you probably interested in using in some of your other slots? Maybe you're doing some boss damage. Shotguns, like Impetus mentioned, are very viable. We've got some rapid fire shotguns. Perfect Paradox, Basso Ostinato, the Aikilos shotgun until it's returned. These rapid fires are all, they're popular for dumping damage. They're popular for their high ammo economy for 1-2 punch builds. You also have some, your lightweight, maybe some aggressive options that have threat detector and Vorpal or reconstruction Vorpal, all kinds of stuff like that is going to be good for shotgun swapping. Those are all pretty popular for pairing with tractor cannon or something like that. Fusion rifles, there's stuff like Riptide and Deliverance that are very popular for, your chill crypt chill clip utility play, Deliver and seeing an uptick since Riptide is still taking 3 shots to freeze. You still have other stuff. You have weapons like Scatter Signal for your Strand option there, and Eremite with like an Envious Reservoir Burst or Cartesian Coordinate. These are all like pretty popular options here for supporting maybe a Tractor Cannon type of build, and all definitely meta options. Let's say you're using Still Hunt, Cloud Strike. You're probably going Rockets these days. You've got Aggressives, Crux Termination, Cold Comfort, Apex Predator, and Hothead. You're probably looking to match some surges there. Those are going to kind of be your meta picks. Looking at like supporting some DPS stuff. We also. We have a lot of other snipers that have come up in popularity this season, even on the legendary side court. What other snipers have we seen since Act 2 of Episode 1 here is kind of kicked in and brought all these sniper mods along with it?
Yeah, so for the mods, we've also got Anti-Barrier Sniper, we've got Incendiary Rifle Rounds, and we've got Sniper's Meditation. And just to give some quick numbers for Meditation, so on Sniper Rifle Direct Hit, grant a stack of Sniper's Meditation. For 7 seconds, Heavy Sniper Rifles grants 2 stacks. And Sniper's Meditation buff persists through Stow. You get increased damage, stability, and reload speed. We're just going to focus on damage here. So it goes 3 to 6 to 9, 12, and then up to 15% increased impact damage. So that applies, that stacks with all damage buffs and debuffs, surges, activity surges, and pretty much any other perks that you can think of. It's one of those, quote, outlier buffs. It will be kind of featured on my damage stacking infographic, just to kind of make it clear that this is its own thing that you can stack with it. So when I mention impact damage, it only applies to the impact portion of a hit. So it doesn't include Still Hunt's Golden Gunshot. That was fixed with the, I think, most recent Sandbox update. It does affect Izanagi's Honed Edge, so you're getting 15% on top of that, 350% damage buff. And Darcy's Target Acquired, they will both benefit from it. I think Target Acquired is also 35%, but it doesn't include Kinetic Tremors or Cloud Strike Stormbringer. Those kind of AoE effects, they don't get buffed by Sniper's Meditation. In terms of snipers that we're looking at, Solar Snipers have got the Ikelos Sniper Rifle, we've got Twilight Oath, and we've got Luna Regolith 3. And then in general, snipers are not solar, so you're not going to get your Incendiary Rifle Rounds here, which is applies 30 stacks with Solar Sniper Rifle Precision Hits. It applies that 30 or 45 when you've got Ashes. You've got Critical Anomaly, which I've talked about quite a lot recently in terms of on the podcast and also on the Patreon with the breakdown. Succession is still doing really well, as is the Supremacy. So those snipers, I think it's fair to say that we've not been as friendly with sniper rifles up to fairly recently. Would I be correct in saying that, lads?
Yeah, I would agree.
So recently, with some changes to sniper rifles, they did tweak with the what's it called, the
flinch resistance is what you're talking about?
Yes, that's it. Thank you. They've tweaked with the ammo reserves as well in the background. We have seen a nice slow uptick. I think we can understand that they don't want to make them as powerful as Destiny 1 snipers. That's fair enough. But we do have some really solid snipers now. And again, I want to really highlight that Critical Anomaly has been my go-to for kind of the Swiss Army knife for champion countering. Succession with the recombination perk for kind of burst damage, and then Supremacy, which has got quite an eclectic range of perks. You've got Vorpal Weapon, you've got Bait and Switch, and you've also got Kinetic Tremors. Some really solid, all-around perks for all of these weapons. Rocket Sidearms Impetus. What's our... you've got our big three here.
That's right. And we do have an artifact mod to support them in this episode. That's Unstoppable Sidearms. So there's very much a reason to be running these in pretty much every piece of in-game content, but especially ones with Unstoppable Champions. We've got an Arca Strand and a Solar one, Indebted Kindness, The Call, and Aberrant Action. Again, these special weapons have almost no downside. They fire at extreme distances. They deal explosive damage. They have fantastic ammo reserves. They're very easy to handle and control, and they reload quite quickly at base without any help from any without any Column 3 perks or Column 2 perks. So really, there has not been a big reason to not run a sidearm. In fact, I know a lot of people have been getting into the double special build because they've been utilizing a rocket sidearm as one of those specials, and then they have maybe a more specialized special weapon, and then they're running something like a rocket launcher or one of our exotic heavy snipers to really take advantage of our new artifact perks. So yes, they are certainly the new hotness, carrying over from our last season where Indebted Kindness debuted. And yeah, they will probably continue to be hot, but I do expect them to probably get tuned a little bit as they are eating trace rifles lunch handily. On the other hand, I would also say machine guns are doing quite well if you don't want to lean into the double special using a rocket sidearm as a primary. So perhaps an adaptive or an aggressive frame. We've got on the adaptive side, Commemoration, Hammerhead. I think either one of those, depending on which one you might have a good roll of, will serve you just fine. We do have, of course, our new aggressive frame machine gun, Pro Memoria from the Pale Heart, craftable, extremely strong, the best frame for machine guns right now. Really looking forward to getting more aggressive frame machine guns. That has a phenomenal role. GLs doing quite well as well. We're just talking special GLs for the moment here. Mountaintop, undisputed, very, very strong weapon, great perk pool. Double fire GLs, also not as many. We've only got the two, Wilder Flight and Wild Style. Wild Style did see a pretty big glow up here this episode with that perk pool refresh here. And they're both incredibly strong, both for damage, but then also if you get a blinding roll, you have two grenades firing out at the same time for an even wider disorienting grenade radius there. So a lot of great special options here. Again, with snipers getting the buff, I think there's a lot of competition, but if we're just looking for kind of an overall meta pick, it's currently rocket sidearms for sure. They do so much. They ask so little of you. They have a ton of ammo, so you rarely need to worry about your reserves, right? You'll get special bricks to drop with ease before you run out of all those rockets on the sidearms. But yeah, they're strong. We do have some primaries that we wanted to talk about here before we swap over to armor. I think right now, hand cannons, pulse rifles currently doing quite well here. On the hand cannon side, it's really adaptives, precision frames, and then the heavy bursts are really the three archetypes that are performing well right now, but also have been performing quite well. We've got on the adaptive frame side, Midnight Coup and Zaouli's Bane, very, very top of the line options here. On the precision side of things, we've got two arc ones here. Posterity, of course, we've talked about, and Sightline Survey, our newer one here, both craftable. A third craftable option dropping from another raid is Word of Crota. That's the Void option. Very, very strong precision frame hand cannon. And then our newest archetype being the Heavy Burst. We've just got the two here, Mahis and Warden's Law. Very, very strong options there. Dominating, Mahis being the only energy one, Warden's being, I think, the better of the two in the kinetic slot, just with its 4 times a charm and Vorpal weapon. I know Lucky Pants builders use that a lot for top tier damage. Pulse rifles, incredibly buffed, incredibly strong. Also a new archetype that just dropped, the Heavy Bursts. We've got the 3 of those that we've just covered in breakdowns in previous episodes, Aisha's Care, Nullify, and Corrasion. Rapid fires are kind of the next one in line. We have a lot of good ones out there as well. I'll just touch on 3, Darkest Before, Oversoul Edict, Autumn Wind being quite strong, and then fan favorite Blast Furnace with the access to those double damage traits. Very, very sexy, strong pulse rifle there. Really, really rounding that out. Auto rifle side, again, I think Onslaught, the perk, has been very popular on some of these newer editions. We got Rasa Rago and Summoner. both with that perk. Very, very powerful. But then also a new frame, that support frame that we got from the Pale Heart in No Hesitation, is an incredible healing machine. Very, very solid. If you don't want to spec all the way into healing with your abilities, you can have a strong primary weapon also healing yourself and your teammates with ease when you shoot them. So quite a lot of utility there on the auto front side. Any other options here on the legendary weapon or even the exotic weapons, guys, that we haven't covered that are performing quite well that we forgot to add before we swap over to armor?
We touched on heavy GLs. I mean, Edge Transit, just
good point. We did not do that. Yeah. What are the ones you're using? Yeah, Edge Transit.
Yeah, and it's it's such a strong weapon with the ability to crank up its magazine size, right? And with bait and switch being that 30% buff on it. And it was also so easy to access and is about to be again. And this is another thing I'll say about some of these weapons that we're mentioning. The focusing for the Brave Arsenal weapons is coming back, right? So if you're hearing us talk about a bunch of these weapons, a Midnight Coup, Edge Transit, Mountaintop, and Blast Furnace, whatever that you don't have a good roll on, it's going to be pretty easy in maybe this coming reset or relatively soon, right? Brave weapon focusing is coming back.
Yep.
Yeah, so there's a massive amount of meta options in there that are still meta well into this, our full release here. Still incredibly strong options, and it'll be pretty easy to go back and focus those for their 60% drop chance once that update hits soon. So, man, yeah, I mean, a lot of really good stuff here, and it's interesting to see how, we've got the new stuff, the newcomers, right, on the final shape. And there's some new stuff in there, but honestly, not massively upended, I wouldn't say, from what I've expected. I've been using aberrant action with Mountaintop when I want to do a lot of damage. You can get something like recombination going on a Mountaintop for like a lot of burst damage on top of using a rocket sidearm and a rocket launcher like Dragon's Breath or something like that that's going to be causing a lot of ignition damage. There's also, just so many good options coming from the new raid. Like we were talking about dumping a bunch of spoils on weapons that are coming from the new raid. Critical Anomalies ability to counteract all three champ types right now in this very specific given moment. It just allows you to have pretty much whatever you want in your energy slot, which is nice. A little niche, but still really just incredibly strong options there. Can't go wrong with any of the heavy burst. I mean, again, maybe sometimes this takes playing seasonal stuff to go get your Corrasion. Maybe you want the Nullify raids a little bit hard there, but I think that I feel like we've got a wide enough meta right now that it's not like it is that hard to get into some of these loadouts that we've been talking about, which is pretty nice. And a lot of these weapons don't have massive, time sinks or entries or anything like that. And again, going back to the whole Brave Arsenal, some of those is going to get easier to access than ever. Actually ever, because it's 60% up from 50 pretty soon, which is great to see.
Yep.
It's about all I got.
Yeah, I think we've got a very varied weapon sandbox. I think it's very fair to say this is probably the best we've had for a while. You mentioned trace rifles earlier on. I want to see trace rifles have a little bit of a to do something that any of the non-exotics anyway. But just looking at the list here, it's just a lot of variation of, like, I can bring in a machine gun for maybe some damage scenarios. Bring in rockets. Rockets are still doing well. They weren't buffed with the whole kind of consolidation with the spec mods. But they also weren't nerfed, so they kind of just stuck at kind of what they were doing before. GL's got a recent buff up. Snipers, as we've already talked about. It's just a nice list here. Not everything's viable. Again, trace rifles being like the kind of go-to weapon to kind of back that up. But even shotguns are been quite viable recently, especially if you are a Titan. Solid list of weapons here.
Yeah, man. The difference between I was just going to say rocket sidearms versus trace rifles You go look at the difference between those two weapons, and I'll tell you a lot.
All right, let's head over to armor, and I'll kick us off with the hunter. Of course, it's going to be Celestial Nighthawk, much like what I mentioned with at the top of this section, talking about Still Hunt. I'm going to talk about Celestial Nighthawk. That is the go-to. It's been quite a wild ride over the last 8 to 12 months since Seahawk was pretty much like F tier, then it went straight to S tier when it went to when it got its buff with the start of season 19. Just having that small kind of, you get your super back a little bit faster, and then they also added the damage buff. They increased that up. Obviously, Celestial Nighthawk buffs Still Hunt on as well. You crunch down one bullet into one supersized, one super energized shot to do even more damage. They did nerf the interaction with Celestial Nighthawk with Still Hunt. It's no longer doing some out of proportion multiplier. I think it's the last, I need to look at the specific numbers, but it's like somewhere in the region of like 6%. Before it was going up to it was close to basically it was close to a normal Celestial Nighthawk shot, which is just bonkers to come out of a Still Hunt Celestial Nighthawk shot. It was just something really wild, and you can charge up Still Hunt really fast to get that Celestial Nighthawk all the time. So that's the reason why it's been knocked down. It's still viable, it's still very good, but it's not as go-to anymore. Outside of damage scenarios, Gifted Conviction, which we all had zero expectations, including myself, when this was revealed back before the final shape came out. But it turns out this has been a very solid exotic. I have been having a blast with Gifted Conviction, just for your kind of add dense activities. When you use your if you use your Ascension or Tempest Strike, you are launched up into the air. It releases 3 tracking arc projectiles. They deal quite reasonable amount of damage themselves, but they also apply jolt. And when you use Ascension or Tempest Strike, you also get amplified for yourself and your nearby allies. And you also apply jolt within, I think it's 15 meters. You also get damage resistance for 10 seconds up to a maximum of 4 stacks, and that applies to any jolt application. It's not when you refresh the jolt, it's just when you apply the jolt. You have to be within 50 meters to refresh that, and I think it goes up to around about 50% damage resistance. Still need to double check on that, but this has just been a solid all-rounder for just a mono type build for Arc, but also on Prismatic, because you get Ascension over on Prismatic. Renewal Grasps, I've used a fair amount. I just want to change things up. I've been having a lot of joy with Celestial Nighthawk and Gifted Conviction, but Renewal Grasp keeps getting stronger. It did get the mini rework where you get Frost Armor, so while you're inside that slowing field, enemies deal 50% reduced damage to you, and users and allies are immediately granted 1 Frost Armor, and then you gain an additional Frost Armor stack every 0.9 seconds. Just a really solid kind of utility exotic. Just a massive dust field when you pair it with Touch of Winter. You get a big crystal as well, so it's also got a little bit more synergy when using on just Stasis subclass, but of course you can use on Prismatic, because hunters do get dust field grenades as their grenade for Stasis. In terms of other exotics, I'll touch on a few later on where we're kind of thinking about buffs. But in general, I think Hunter exotics are doing fairly well. There's still some outliers that are just like, why does this exist? But Assassin's Cowl's still really great for those plays. I'm not using it as much, but I would always recommend it for kind of solo type content if you're doing like a dungeon. then you've just got things like Certarachne's Facade, which is the grants woven mail on grappling. They did add that particular perk with the exotic class armor. Full Tracer I've been using a fair amount, just with, getting that free ×4 surge. A little bit of a mini game when it comes to Full Tracer, so I wouldn't be surprised if people are a bit kind of put off with how many loops you have to kind of jump through just to get the whole thing running. But it can be useful in a few builds. I have a particular stasis build with the Shatter Dive, which I kind of go into a little bit more detail. I spoke about that in the past. I think it is also on the Podcast versus Enemies Discord builds section for the host builds. And I think Hunter Exotics are doing pretty well. At least in terms of current Sandbox. Now, I am a bit jealous about one particular Titan Exotic, and I'll hand that over to Saint.
Yeah.
Actually, there's two here. You've listed two that I'm quite jealous about.
Similar to Gifted Conviction, Hazardous Propulsion has definitely taken the Titan meta by storm, I would say, in this release. It's good for dealing just burst damage on a single target. It is pretty easy to activate about every 30 seconds. It buffs your rocket launchers, rocket sidearms. There's all kinds of stuff that covers. Cord, I know you put out some infographic little piece on this covering all of that stuff. But yeah, it's great. It's great outside of DPS phases. It's great in DPS phases. It's easy to activate. It doesn't require a ton of investment, and it does a lot of damage. Hazardous Propulsion is just the most, not only effective, but just like really fun thing to use, I would say, right now on Titan. No doubt about that. It's just, I don't know, it just scratches that right, mech kind of fantasy itch, and it just is really, really nice. We're looking right now at a list of all the stuff that it's impacted. We're talking all your rocket sidearms, including Buried Bloodline, your Dragon's Breath if you've got ignitions going off, Wolfpack rounds from your sword, Wolfpack rounds from whatever rocket that just happens to be benefiting from Wolfpack rounds, nanotech tracer rockets, the missile strike from Grand Overture. There's just so much that can benefit from this. It's kind of nuts. I don't know what else to say. It's just it's hardly ever not on my character these days, and if it's not equipped, it's definitely in my chest piece inventory waiting to be so. There's some other things that are still hanging on though. Obviously, stoicism, exotic class items. We won't get into a ton here, and that's kind of absorbed some of this. Syntheseps still see play on and off the class item. There's an absolute classic. There's a reason that Syntheseps are still popular. Hoyle also, on and off class items still sees play for just supporting any kind of ability loop. Going like slightly off meta, I would consider still very strong. There are a few other options out there. Second chance gauntlets for just the amount of void mods and things like we have this season. You can really get a lot of benefit out of our second chance, especially in some barrier champion content and stuff like that. Pyrogill's really fun to use. Consecration tornadoes, fine. The actual super itself is still really strong. It's like 650% of the hammer slam. Candace Ridge Lance Cap, I would even say, can be used in some decent builds. So yeah, there's a few others there that I wouldn't consider hard meta, but definitely very strong if you're building into them. I would say for sure. Second
Pyrogill, by the way.
Well, go ahead.
Sorry, Saint. Pyrogill was the second one that I was referring to. That
okay.
It's either, whenever I'm on Titan, it's either Hazardous or Pyrogill, probably the latter most of the time, because it's just so fun consecrating, and then those big cyclones pop up, and then you've got the massive hammer.
Yeah, they both just really speak to, I mean, in my eyes, like Titan fantasy, Titan identity, right? Whether that is like tanky mech or smash King DDD massive hammer, kind of
burn everything.
Yeah. As one character long ago said, sometimes you need to get your mallet. It just it's what needs to happen. Warlock's
I know what the
impetus,
thumbnail for this episode is going to be.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. You already know it's coming. Warlock's. Where you at? What are you running? What do you think is meta? What's kind of on the fringes?
Yeah, I'll talk about our two new exotics first here. Speaker Sight, I don't think anyone is surprised that this is strong. Healing is good, actually. Very controversial statement here. I'm known for those here on the podcast, but yeah, healing's pretty good, pretty meta, pretty helpful, pretty handy. And a healing turret is probably the most helpful you could be. So no surprise, Speaker Sight is getting a lot of play here. Obviously, it will probably be an evergreen meta pick here unless Healing Grenade receives a pretty hefty nerf. I doubt that very much, but it could happen. I wouldn't rule out. Matadoxia, I've not played with this a ton, but there are a lot of people that swear by it, and it is useful. It does give Prismatic Warlock access to the Suspend verb through our Arcane Needle melee in particular, which is already, I think, the melee that many folks run when they run Prismatic Warlock. It's probably the best for the range, and then also the multi-charges. Matadoxia giving Suspend to Prismatic Warlock, like we needed another verb access on that subclass, but again, it can be very powerful. The class already specializes in crowd control, and Suspend is one of the top tier crowd control verbs, so you can really lean into that fantasy on Prismatic Warlock with Matadoxia, or you could just run it on a typical Strand Lock, and then you have another option there for both getting anti-barrier built into your abilities, but also melee synergy and easy Suspend, even easier Suspend access. So I think both of our new exotics are currently meta. I think Speaker Sight and Matadoxia are probably both going to remain pretty meta here. I would be very surprised to see either one of those tuned in such a way that they would fall out of the usual rotation of exotics. Of course, the one that has come out of nowhere to absolutely dominate has been Getaway Artist on Prismatic Warlock, with the unique interaction of the Arc Soul and also our Ice Turret. So we'll cover this in more detail when we get to Prismatic and I talk about that Prismatic Warlock build, but very, very surprised. I don't know if this will get nerfed or not. I would imagine Bungie wants Warlocks to go and play with the new Warlock exotic class items, but there's not really a need for any of them outside of some very niche damage rolls. And with the current difficulty of acquiring exotic class items, even with the buffs coming to them here with the Solstice update, it's still going to be a bit of a slog. So I think for more casual players, they'll just stick to Getaway Artists and absolutely chew through enemies in pretty much all levels of content. I don't know if Getaway Artists will be relevant for the time moving forward, even in episode 2 and 3, but it is definitely stealing the show here in episode 1. Very, very strong. And as far as some of our more evergreen content, there's a ton of them. I really just want to focus on these 3 because I think these are the ones bring everyone's attention to. We already know about the various Solar Warlock exotics. I'm not even going to go into them. That's probably a topic for another time. There's a lot of them. I would definitely recommend playing with these 3 as they are new, and they will certainly get you through all levels of content, and they're a lot of fun to play with. So I will transition over to abilities. I'll pass you back to Court here to talk about what are we playing with on the Hunter ability side of things.
Yeah, so really easy. I've already touched on a few of these. So Ascension on Arc or Prismatic for that on-demand jolt and amplification. Golden Gun, of course, on Solar or Prismatic. Again, see Seahawk or Still Hunt. Stasis Hunter isn't the in thing at the moment, but with recent buffs, it's been very strong. It's still something that I love to go back to. It's just a great kind of build. Stasis itself, I think, again, we'll talk about this maybe in a future episode, but Stasis still needs some kind of hyped up, some additional kind of help, just to kind of supplant it into the sandbox. Things I've not talked about though, Grapple on Prismatic. Obviously that is our strand quotes grenade. it triggers a bunch of melee stuff, especially when you do combine it with the exotic class item perks. I'm getting ahead of myself though, because we'll talk about that in a future episode when we talk about exotic class item perks. And then lastly, as ever, Tether, it still remains strong as ever as we get more and more ad dense activities. Deadfall Tether is also on Prismatic, so you can pair that with Orpheus Rig if you want. But yeah, like Tether's just always going to be the go-to if you just want to clear out a bunch of ads and let Saints, Hazardous Propulsion rockets clear them out, and then the Getaway Artist 3 turret combo to clear out them as well. Hunter abilities are still really strong, very just solid game staples on all of the subclasses. I'm just kind of skipping through some of them. We also got a few buffs related to Arc Bolt did get a buff, just with that being the arc grenade for Prismatic. And I have went back to Lucky Raspberry. I know I'm kind of going backwards with the exotic armor, but arc bolts feel really strong. And when you do combine it with Lucky Raspberry, it feels kind of child's play when it comes to a bunch of ads and getting your grenade back, amplifying it with the ionic traces, and just a lot of fun going on. So again, I'll have a little bit kind of further commentary when it comes to kind of buffs or nerfs or updates we want to see in a moment here. But Titans, how are we feeling?
Yeah, it's okay. You know, there's a lot of like just doomsaying, I feel like, at a few weeks into our current episode, that Prismatic Titan wasn't strong enough, or Titans are in a horrible spot. There's all this talk after the raid placement. And I think that just is like a really niche thing that has to do with range DPS loadouts. And I really am not, that does not dictate to me that the class itself is greatly suffering. Now, there's some great things in the class, and there's some things that could be improved, which we'll talk about in a minute. Right now what I see is like being really popular. Obviously, you have your the build that you see here everywhere is triple consecration, knockout, right? On Prismatic Titan, it's all over the place. You use grapple grenades. You have your prismatic fragment that is going to allow you to deal additional damage to targets that are affected by darkness abilities. All that kind of stuff. It's a really strong close range build. It clears rooms, all that stuff. Twilight Arsenal on Prismatic and on Void proper, it's really strong super, as long as you don't hit your teammates in the back of the head. Excellent super. You just gotta watch out where you're aiming that thing just a little bit. I still think that there is something to be said for like Solar and Void Titan. I haven't really been touching Arc and Stasis very much, but Solar Titan right now, I went in like full in on a consecration sunspots build, and really leaning all the way in on using several fragments for ignitions, pumping the ignitions up. You capitalize on something like Solar Fulmination with your Consecration and Dragon's Breath and Aberrant Action and all this stuff, and you can have a really high damage outputting build with something like Pyrogale, and have a lot of healing from your sunspots, a lot of ability regeneration, just uptime there. So it's something easily really strong ignition focused solar build. Void has got some stuff with, again, kind of taking a moderately strong kit already, I would say, from the base, and building into it with your Shield Crush, Expanding Abyss, all that kind of stuff from the current artifact can make something like a Second Chance Titan build feel pretty strong and be able to deal a lot of, have a lot of utility as far as just like controlling champions and GMs and things like that. And then also just like having generally good survivability. But yeah, so, controlled demo, incredibly strong on the Void kit, along with Twilight Arsenal. Your Prismatic Consecration Knockout, also very strong. And then Solar, just leaning in on Solar Fulmination and Ignitions, Synthos or Pyrogale, something like that. There's some really strong stuff coming together on those fronts. Warlocks coming off of armor that we just talked about. How you feeling on general builds, on how those are coming together? And, just supers and stuff.
Even better. Yeah, Song of Flame. Don't think I really need to explain why this is meta. It is incredible. Clears ads, keeps you alive through ridiculous amounts of damage resistance. Yeah, you like explosions? Turn your flames into little baby fireflies and send them at enemies with your grenade or your melee and just set them all on fire. It really is a burn the world in a kind of a very intense way. Solar Warlock in general is the strongest I think it's ever been, really, when it comes to just the quantity and quality of the kit and the exotic armor pieces that all tie into it. Again, I don't want to get into all of them right now, but again, Healing Grenade with Speaker Sight is fantastic. There's a lot of different options with... You could do pretty much all the aspects. I'm looking through these right now. Yeah, every single aspect here. I was going to mention a little bit later on, but I'll touch on Helion being a great source of passive damage, especially with our Solar Fulmination artifact mod this episode. Going to be great for just passively creating really strong ignitions through that just scorch, that routine scorch here. Very, very powerful. I still think Helion will be strong even after this episode when we lose Solar Fulmination. Again, it's shooting out damage in the background while you're playing after you pop it, which is fantastic. You don't even have to think about it, but you're setting enemies on fire, and if you're really spec'd into Scorch as a verb on your Solar subclass, it can be fantastic. But if you're running Helion on Prismatic, no worries. Again, it's just passive damage. You're setting enemies on fire. If it's one big beefy target, they'll keep targeting it, and then that will also end up leading to an ignition, which is another fantastic source of damage. I've mentioned the Healing Grenade and Speaker Sight. Again, that is just going to be an all-time classic here. If we pivot off of Solar, we've got Feed the Void granting us Devour. I'm thinking more through the lens of Prismatic, but still, even on Void Warlock, Feed the Void is that linchpin, that centerpiece that really keeps it going. Devour is a fantastic verb, and the ease of use with which Warlocks get to access Devour is fantastic. And then, of course, Arc Soul, particularly through Getaway Artists, has been phenomenal on Prismatic. Provides near 100% uptime on the Amplified verb, which, if you are using the Galvanic Armor Artifact mod, is also providing you extra DR when you're amplified. So really, we are running around on Prismatic Warlock with insane DR and then insane passive damage and insane grenade uptime for unbelievable crowd control, and then locking down some higher health targets, some beefier targets. So I really can't criticize anything on Warlock. They're all strong. There's all plenty of solid exotic armor options. I think maybe the one subclass that I would like to see fleshed out a little bit more is Arc, but I think that's more just the fact that I have issues with the Arc verbs rather than the actual aspects. I don't find Amplified to be as helpful outside of some very specific interactions. Jolting is phenomenal. I would like to see Arc Blind built a little bit more into the Warlock kit, but that is a personal preference, and that's really the last thing I can touch on. And I'm kind of getting into our buff/nerf/updates here. But yes, Warlock is in a phenomenal spot. I don't think there's really any path that won't lead you to success in any serious in-game PvE on Warlock. And I think there's also some just fun stuff, which is really the most important thing. There's fun stuff on Warlock across all of our different subclasses or different elements, so to speak. Now, if we do talk about buffs and nerfs, updates, kind of or what we want to see, this is the state of the sandbox. What do we hope in the sandbox morphs into, evolves into, or pivots away from, maybe? On the abilities side of things, Saint, I know you had mentioned Titan. there are some people out there that are naysaying some doom posting Titans. Where do you fall on that? And then what are you hoping to see with the state of the sandbox just for Titan players?
I feel that the Titan pure element classes are fine. You know, maybe say skews a little bit, maybe Arc could use a little bit, but I really, you know, when it comes to like Prismatic Titan, I feel like Prismatic Titan is one strong aspect away from gaining access to some great builds and feeling more diverse, which maybe is one of the things that people have been so honed in on of, oh, it's just consecration plus knockout is the only viable thing on Prismatic Titan. Okay, I don't think that's entirely true, but if we saw, Soul Invictus, Control Demo, Bastion from Void into the Fray from Strand added into our Prismatic Titan kit as far as just available aspects go, I think that is all that it would take to get your Prismatic Titan into people thinking and feeling like it's a much more varied build, or there's a lot more variation that you can find here as far as making different things work together in combination. But yeah, something like Control Demo, Bastion, and Into the Fray, and Soul Invictus, honestly, they all offer defensive, really strong defensive capability in one way or another. You're healing, getting your ability regen and restoration from sunspots. You're getting 80 HP added to you and all your teammates within a massive radius on Control Demo. Bastion's Overshields. Into the Fray is Woven Mail. All these things. I don't ever think we would get a Banner of War or something like that on Prismatic Titan, but I don't. That's not my expectation, and I think that anybody that's really in tune with the games like Sandbox and balancing probably would agree that would not be a healthy thing. But yeah, I would love to see one of these things added in to Prismatic Titan, and I think that would really just up the overall efficacy of that kit and the ability to just change things up a lot in that kit. So that's my kind of big hope, and I don't think it's crazy to assume that they will tweak fragments and buff and nerf fragments over time, and maybe even add in other aspects for the classes into Prismatic. I don't think is a crazy thing to think of. Court, where are you at on Hunters?
So, as I've already mentioned, I think the overall Hunter kit is doing well, especially Prismatic, because I've found a use for all the grenades from the other subclasses and the melees. They all have their uses. I mentioned previously would love to see additional help to stasis. We spoke about that a few weeks ago with decaying frost armor. The stasis shard cooldown is a bit too extreme, but again, that applies to all of stasis, not just specifically Stasis Hunter. Over on the armor side for me, talk about class item armor in the future. I think there's a solid set of perks there, but when it comes to the individual exotics, I think that's the weakest part of the Hunter kit. If you think of Hunters, the entire kit as a pizza or a pie or something like that, the weakest slice of all of that has to be the exotic armor. I'm certainly not saying it's the weakest out of all the classes. Maybe it is, but at least when it comes to the kit as a whole, exotic armor can just be really they're really good. You've got things like Star Eater scales, or even niche builds like Triton Vice. I've been having some fun with that. They have buffed it recently. They've made it the glaive exotic. But then you've got things like Blight Ranger, which hasn't seen any sort of movement since it was launched. Gemini Jester can be a bit of a meme thing in PvP, but it's pretty much not it anywhere else. Squeegeon Vest, again, is another. It's not seen any help. It's not useful in Prismatic whatsoever because you can't get you can't get Spectral Blades. It's the same with Blight Ranger. You can't get Arc Strider on, or I should say Arc Staff on Prismatic. Raiju's Harness, again, it's another Arc Staff thing. It doesn't work on Prismatic, so you're very focused on one particular subclass of one particular super, which just doesn't do much for me. And then we've mentioned this many times, but the young and Ahamkara's Spine got that pretty severe nerf, and I feel like at this stage, now that we see how Prismatic is performing, it's well, I don't think Yas needed that nerf in the first place when you've got some insane gameplay loops with the Prismatic build. We don't get trip mines with Prismatic Hunter. That is the not skip grenades, but
Swarm.
Swarm. Thank you. We get Swarm in Prismatic. We don't get trip mines, so this would only really be applying to solar hunter anyway. But yeah, the amount of gameplay loops where I've just seen like, well, this was basically young Aham's Spine way back when it was in its like best state. So it's a bit of a shame that we haven't seen like a kind of unnerf, or at least like a little bit of an alleviance to the nerf, because it has been pretty severe. I have kind of I do agree with that sentiment now. I think at the time I was like, well, maybe Yas needed a little bit of its wings clipped, but yeah, I think it was just a bit too much. And then, so Six Coyote, it got a free Reaper mod as part of the Final Shape Sandbox change. It didn't move the needle for me. Maybe it's not for me anyway. It's obviously more of a kind of PvP exotic. It's got more uses with if you want to double up on various class ability spawning or triggering effects. Like you could use Ascension twice with this. I'm not quite sure why you'd use it, because it's fairly easy to get it up pretty fast anyway. But yeah, the free Reaper mod just didn't really do much for me. I kind of wish they went down the path of it gets a unique Reaper. Saw some suggestions on Reddit and kind of elsewhere where it was kind of either a no or a tiny cooldown versus a mod version. So it's a bit of more of an amplified effect for the Reaper mod. Because the more Reaper mods that you apply, the shorter the cooldown of spawning more orbs of power. So I think if they wanted to go down that route, I feel like if you putting on an exotic, something like Six Coyote, I would be fine with it having no cooldown at all compared to the mod version. But yeah, that's my kind of thoughts. I don't think anything really needs to be buffed. Sorry, not buffed, nerfed for any of the sandbox. There's a lot of commentary with PvP. We're not going to get into that specific rabbit hole, but in terms of Prismatic Hunter, it's doing perfectly good. It's perfectly well. Is it maybe... Again, I'm not talking about PvP. I'm talking specifically about PvE. Is there maybe parts of the build that are pretty out of band? Perhaps. But I'll talk about Prismatic Hunter in the future and my kind of thoughts with that. Saint, you got any other... did you talk about kind of armor exotics here before we pass it to Impetus?
I'm feeling pretty good about Titan armor, I would say.
Okay.
I mean, there's, obviously there's some stuff that will continue to get memed on, like Mask of the Quiet One. There's some things, yeah. There's some things that I would like to see like differentiated a little bit more between their class item version and their pure version, so to say, when it comes to exotic armors. There's been a little bit of stuff on that, like Armamentarium got, was it heavy-handed? Or you can make orbs on grenade kills for free whenever you are using Armamentarium, the original version, and then Alpha Loop P has like Reaper built in, I believe. And I think that those are interesting, but we are kind of in an odd spot here when it comes to those pieces of exotic armor and exotic armor, in the class items. We'll talk more about that when we get to that whole episode and topic, but it's just my kind of brief 2 cents on that as far as Titan stuff goes. Yeah, that's all I got for that.
Yeah, I don't have a ton. I was looking through the armors here for Warlock a little bit earlier. They're all in a generally good spot. I don't think we have any outliers of, wow, this is not helpful at all. I mean, again, there's still some stuff like Astrocyte Verse, I think, has a very specific PvP playstyle. Would I like to see some more PvE integration? It did get some, but I would like to see more, yes. But I'm not losing sleep over it. I don't think it's, there's still other fantastic options. Nezarec Sin, Controverse Hold for Void Warlocks that I think is quite nice and still solid in in-game PvE. So that's one of those things where I think there's still enough of a fantasy for the Void locks out there that if Astrocyte Verse isn't quite living up to that fantasy, or Skull of Dire Ahamkara, to use another example, if those two aren't living up to the example, we're okay, because there's still some pretty top tier options in addition to those. So I'm very much kind of with Saint here, but for the Warlock exotic armor, it's all generally in a good place. Sure, there's some stuff that could get tweaked, but nothing horrible, nothing crazy out of band, and plenty of very solid options, great options, really, for a variety of different elements. So that's my thought on exotic armor. Are we good to move on to weapons here?
Yeah, Jasper maybe has some exotic armor thoughts. I think I heard him chiming in, but yeah, if he's good, I think we're good to move on to just general weapon
I think he
talk.
disagrees with Impetus.
Didn't realize he was a Skull of Dire Ahamkar main. I will update my spreadsheet here on that note.
He is a Briarbines user.
Okay. All right.
Yes, weapons here. I think we're all in agreement. We obviously thought aggressive scouts were getting buffed a few weeks back, but it's going to be imminent. Really excited to see some of those buffs. Really want to play around with scout rifles and see how they perform. I think we've been fairly critical on aggressive scouts, so it's glad to see they're getting some nice buffs. I'll skip the middle one. I'll talk about linear LFRs. Yeah, I think at this stage now, I think they could do with just a tiny buff. Maybe another kind of crit multiplier increase. Because I think the weapons team have always prefaced with LFRs are the go-to for precision damage. But if you do a damage shot, a body shot, then you're not doing any damage. It's very apparent with Sleeper Simulant. That's the kind of thing that I always remember when you're using Sleeper Simulant. You're going for that precision shot, and if you don't, then you're not doing much damage. But yeah, I am in agreement with this point. Linear LFRs could do with a small buff. They're not completely whack. They're not in dire straits whatsoever. But again, when you've got things like rocket launchers, even the aggressive machine gun still doing some serious damage, LFRs can just be fairly, either I'm not using them or I will use them when it's a specific set, like bait and switch with Cataclysmic. Saint, I think, was it yourself that put this note about SMGs getting a small buff?
Yeah, and I was kind of looking at kind of trying to just look at the weapons and all the context of each other and what's really popular and what's not. Sidearms are way outperforming SMGs right now, which is wild. And the same goes for LFRs when I say that, they've had their time, but they're, it feels like they could use just a little bit, right? SMGs have access to different traits than some sidearms, depending on what it is. There are still some SMGs out there that are getting play, no doubt about that. But 5% little SMG, 5% general buff to SMGs kind of just get them maybe not quite to where sidearms are. Sidearms, you maybe need a little closer range. SMGs, you get that extra 5-10 meters on the affected band. Same thing for LFRs, crit multiplier is great because it's it still kind of leans into you have to hit a crit. Well, what if that multiplier was just an extra 5% higher or something like that? They've got fine total damage, at this point. The DPS is not really great, but that's not what they're there for. Small stuff, but I think that would just even things out a little bit, right?
Yep.
It's so strange to me. I just never thought I'd be in a world where SMGs were not optimal. I always thought they'd be that fallback option, but here we are. So, and that's, I don't know. Are you guys using regular sidearms? I feel like, we would meme on sidearms, and then rocket sidearms came out, and everyone's like, "Oh yeah, I'm using a sidearm," but they're using rocket sidearms and not regular sidearms. Have you guys been using Breachlight to name a recent example?
Yeah, I have used Breachlight a little bit because of the threaded blast is really strong on the artifact for exploding tangles. They're like little mini Warmind nukes. Which is really nice, and it's pretty fun. Damage output's pretty solid. I will still mess around with the little Brigand's Law every now and then. I was using Voltshot SMGs, and I decided to just give that a try. Feel pretty good. Can't really complain too much there. But yeah, I would say that's about it. As far as sidearms in general go, I don't see a ton of play. And I don't count Forerunner either. Okay, that's different. That's its own thing. Good weapon, no doubt, but might as well be in the rocket, more of the rocket sidearm category, which I think I speak for all of us when I say that they're in a perfect spot, and nobody should look at that. All right, and there's nothing to see there, honestly. In fact, just every other part of the sandbox is up for grabs. And compared to what is the gold standard of
If anything happens to Rocket Sidearms, I'll quit playing Destiny 2.
So it's really over for the game. It's not the studio laying off hundreds of people. It's it's not projects getting canceled. It's the Rocket Sidearm nerfs, honestly, that come for you in the end.
Oh no, facts.
When you mention sidearm, I immediately just think of the Rocket Sidearms.
Exactly, that's my point.
But see, I had my fun back when you were memeing at us for using Brigand's Law with Volt Shot. I had my fun back then. It was fun to use. I'm not really thinking about just normal non-rocket sidearms at the moment. I'm not really thinking about SMGs either. Do I agree that they should get a little bump up? Yeah, but again, SMGs had their time in the sun, and the sandbox goes through these kind of waves, and I'm fine with that. I'm fine with SMGs just taking a little bit of a time out for the next, I don't know, till midway season through episode 2. I'm fine with that. I to be honest, I am using subjunctive quite a lot, which is the
that arc one,
lightweight frame. What did I have on it? I think it's stats for all or threat detector plus volt shot, one of the two. And that has been performing quite well. I was using a little bit during our master run content when I was on Arc Hunter. So SMGs aren't terrible. They're not in a bad state. But this was obviously it's a little bit different when you've got Volt Shot, because Volt Shot just kind of spreads out everywhere and you just completely eliminate a bunch of ads. But in terms of non-exotics, I'm not using Callus Mini Tool much, if at all, these days. Thinking about any other SMGs, obviously we've got some Guardian games with the title. I'm not using that. I got a few recluse rolls from Into the Light, but I'm not using them. I'm just looking at the list here. Even the Icolos SMG, that's our aggressive version for Volt Shot. No, I've not been using it a lot, but I think that's fine. I'm okay with that in terms of sandbox health, because I do want to use. My eyes immediately went. I've got dim open here. My eyes immediately went to Buried Bloodline or Indebted Kindness.
Yeah, that's the same.
But I have been using other things like Sweet Sorrow, which is way back season 16. That's the our land tank arc auto rifle. I've been using Rosarago. I've been using Prosecutor. I have been using auto rifles have took their place in some formats. But yeah, my point is that I'm okay with SMGs being taking a little bit of a break from the sandbox. But yes, I do agree that they should get a little buff at some point.
Yeah, I brought that up to say more so that it feels weird that we don't have a very obvious close range primary option. I do think you're right, Court, that auto rifles are currently filling that slot, but it feels like even with the SMGs getting tuned down, sidearms still didn't naturally slot into that role for a lot of people. We just went up in the range category to auto rifles instead, and now we're just using auto rifles up close, which is fine. You're not wrong for doing that, of course, but you would think for the two primary types that are pretty much purpose built for close quarters combat, with the more dominant one of the SMGs being tuned down, I have not seen sidearms also then rise up to kind of fill that void. It's we just pretend that there aren't close quarter primaries anymore, and we use an auto rifle for our close to mid range engagement distances, or you get a little cheeky and use your rocket sidearm up close and maybe take a little bit of self damage, right?
Yeah. Again, I don't want to go too much into the rabbit hole here, but do you guys know, because I've not really had any knowledge about PvP recently, but how are sidearms and SMGs performing in that sandbox, in the PvP sandbox?
Oh, just fine.
Fine?
Yeah, I played some trials. against all my better judgment a few weeks ago, as you guys know, to get the pulse rifle and comp to get the auto rifle as well. And I'm not like some cracked PvP player, and I was having plenty of success still running, a high mobility Peacekeepers build or a rapid fire sidearm as a backup, still plenty effective options. I even used several different archetypes of sidearms and found success for the most part. And if I didn't, it was my fault because I just absolutely got played or pushed when I shouldn't have, that kind of a thing. But yeah, plenty viable in PvP. And, to that exact point of, I've been using the Riposte with destabilizing rounds more than I'm using the Recluse. And that's odd. It kind of, or at least like traditional mindset of like when I wanted to use a close range automatic weapon, I went void and I used my destabilizing rounds Riposte to trigger controlled demo, and not my not a void SMG, just because I'm in my head I'm thinking, oh well, the damage is just about as good, if not slightly better, on a rapid fire, or in this case 720 RPM, let's just say auto rifle, versus my my SMG equivalent. And I can't remember off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure when I went and checked like Mossy's DPS output against, like minor tier enemies, the 720 auto was better and it has better range. And that doesn't make any sense, right? Yeah, just feels a little off in the balancing. Like auto rifles, if they're going to have that range band going up to like 35 meters, shouldn't be beating out SMGs that are going up to 20 something meters, right? 20-ish, 25 meters, I think max maybe, versus some auto rifles can get, especially your high impacts are pushing past 35 meters. Seems odd for sure.
Okay. Yeah, I was just curious how they were performing in PvP. And again, that's kind of where I'm like, if they're fine in one sandbox, but maybe not so much in our sandbox, the PvE, then I'm like, okay, again, I'm fine with them taking a little break. Not for like the next 4 years, like we've seen with some of these weapons. And like I said earlier on with... I think we're in a very good spot in terms of overall sandbox health when it comes to weapons. I think everything, barring, as we've been mentioning, like SMGs and trace rifles, they're kind of the exceptions to this particular rule when it comes to everything's got some sort of viability, in the PvE sandbox. So I'm happy with the current health, but I do agree that like LFRs and SMGs and trace rifles do kind of merit a small uptick when it comes to their damage.
Well, that is our first State of the Sandbox. I think we covered a lot. A lot more than I think we were planning to at the start here, but there you go, folks. That's the meta. Just, clip that whole part of the podcast and you're good to go. You'll immediately get all your raid titles, your dungeon titles, solo flawlesses, solo flawless grandmasters, really everything you need we just talked about. So you're welcome. And I think that wraps it up for episode 112. My name is Impetus. I want to thank our audio engineer, Autodidactos, for his work behind the scenes, keeping us sounding professional and sharp over so many different episodes here. Again, you can find me in Discord and in Destiny by that name, Impetus, and also lurking on the Pod vs. Enemies username on Twitter. Court, what are we going to talk about next week? Are we planning on covering Prismatic? Is that still the plan here?
I feel like that is the plan. Also, we'll keep an eye on what news comes from Bungie. We haven't heard anything recently. They I think DMG did tweet out that they cancelled the most recent TWIDs, which I think would have went into a little bit more detail with upcoming content in regards to the mid-season update. I think that's still going ahead. By the time this podcast comes out, that should be live, as will Solstice. But again, we'll keep an eye and an ear on current events and news. But I think next time we'll talk about our exotic class items, Ergo Sum, and Prismatic Sandbox.
Fantastic. Well then, where can our listeners find you, good sir?
Yeah, so you can find me over on socials as Court Projects. Find me on the Discord as that as well. You can find my spreadsheets and infographics over on the D2 Spreadsheets link tree, along with other spreadsheets and applications to enhance your Destiny experience. Saint, where can we find you?
Yep, you can find me at Saint_Kabir on Twitter, hanging out in Discord, in game, rounding out some of those Salvation's Edge ecstatic triumphs to complete that title, and lamenting a bit of a loss this week. Tough week, just to watch everything that happened. If you know people that were impacted by this, directly, personally, don't be afraid to reach out. If you can amplify the voices of people that are looking for work or refer them to jobs at your company, stuff like that, like, really makes an impact. And it is pretty much all we can do in moments like this, where we are trying to look out for people that deserve better than they are being dealt in life. Thanks for listening to another episode of PvE. We'll be back next week with more stuff on a game that continues to live despite what some may say. Until next time, thanks for listening to PvE.